Yeah.
We were all taught at some point that there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah.
So is there really such a thing as a free tour?
Well, I was taught the same thing when I was growing up as well, but I can say with absolute confidence that there is such thing as a free tour.
Do you get lunch with it?
You do have to pay for the lunch, unfortunately. But there is such thing as a free tour, and that's backed up every day by the, albeit minority of travelers, but by a number of travelers who choose not to contribute in this tips-based free tour model.
So while we're at it then, explain to the audience how the business model of a free tour actually works and doesn't work.
Yeah, so of course, notwithstanding what I just said, of course, it is an economic model, and there are a number of kind of important stakeholders that need to get paid. The guides work for tips, and putting that sort of trust in the guides and that trust in the products to say to the customer, look, make that financial contribution decision not only completely at your own discretion, but also at the end of the service, is something which typically in a free walking tour model attracts outstanding tour guides.
And when does the customer know that's the business model?
They know, it's in all of the communication ahead of time. So whatever method you book in, whether you pick up a flyer at a hotel, you see an ad on Google, on our website, it's communicated ahead of time. At the very latest, it's explained by the guide at the start of the tour.
So the customers, it's transparent. They know when the tour starts that any compensation the tour guide gets comes from the customer.
Exactly, that the guides work for tips alone.
Yeah.
So, of course, there's another important stakeholder in that whole sort of paradigm, which is ourselves, which is the company. And the free tour essentially for us is how we create a connection to customers to upsell products and services.
So in essence, it's a unique customer acquisition strategy.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So do you do it for free?
The company?
Yeah.
Well, no, of course not. It's,
what's missing here?
Like I say, the free tour model is based on that kind of assumption that the majority of customers on that free tour will make a purchasing decision during the break, typically, of the free walking tour to buy either one of the products or services which are operated and run by ourselves, so a paid walking tour later that afternoon or the next day or what have you, or increasingly popular, an activity or a tour run by one of our third-party operators.
So what percentage of your company's tours are actually free?
Well, in terms of customers, every city is set up that there's only one free walking tour, and that's the general highlights tour. So the Brandenburg Gate, the Eiffel Tower, the Buckingham Palace, etc. And the select tours, or the paid tours, go into a particular aspect of history or cultural relevance in the city in a bit more detail. In terms of customer numbers, 65% of our customers are free tour customers, and the rest are paid tour customers.
So in Berlin here, for example, only one tour is free?
That's right, yeah.
And how many paid tours might you have?
In Berlin, we have 7 paid tours ourselves.
And is there any other way SANDEMANs makes money other than that 35%?
Yeah, we also take a charge the guides who are performing the free tour a marketing fee, so a customer acquisition cost, which is a nominal fee, 1 or 2 euros, depending on market and the guide. But that doesn't sort of go anywhere near, of course, in terms of offsetting the cost of running the tour. The main engine of the business model is that conversion strategy.
So everybody understands the tour guide pays a nominal fee to SANDEMANs.
Yeah.
Okay. So those are your 2 biggest revenue streams?
Yeah, exactly.
34%.
Exactly. And I think a very kind of important thing to mention here is because I remember, and this is 15 years ago, I remember kind of trying to explain
when you were a tour guide.
Yeah, I remember trying to explain this model to my grandma, God bless her, and it was difficult, because it's and even now I think to many people who aren't familiar with it, despite the fact that it's a very mature industry now, it's very difficult to find a city in the world that doesn't have some type of free tour on offer. It is still quite kind of difficult to comprehend, but it's built on, I suppose, on 2 things. Firstly, as a backbone of trust, not only in the product, but also in the travelers. We're not asking the travelers to trust us. We're putting our trust in the travelers to make a decision. And, sorry.
When you were a tour guide,
Yeah.
did you do free tours and only make money from tips?
Yes.
Did you also do the paid model?
Yes.
Which tours did you make more money from?
By far and away the free tour, by far and away, because there's no cap on your earnings, theoretically. If you are I mean, not to speak about myself in this context, but if you are an outstanding guide...
I'm assuming you went from tour guide to CEO, so you're probably a pretty good tour guide.
Sometimes they're not the same skill set, I've learned. In fact, sometimes they're diametrically opposed skill sets. But anyway, yeah, it does work. And for example, you know, I think that if you are an excellent tour guide who is not risk averse, and I don't mean that in a negative connotation. I understand that for some guides, it's their profession. You know, they've perhaps studied long term for it, and they don't want to take that risk of working exclusively for tips. If you're excellent, and if you see that opportunity as entrepreneurial opportunity, the free tour is the best place for you.
Why would an excellent tour guide make more tips if it were a free tour than a paid tour? Why?
Just statistically, it is the case. The way that customers behave, no surprise, if you put your trust in them, they're so used to not being trusted. If you put your trust in them, they will absolutely love you for it, and they're desperate to pay it back. They're desperate to reciprocate.
There are hundreds of different types of tour operators. Here, would you recommend that those of them that give some kind of actual tour, not an attraction or event, experiment or offer a free tour?
I think it depends. I mean, it only works, in my experience, I think it works best with urban city tourism, so within the city, and it wouldn't work, I wouldn't imagine, with tours that have kind of extravagant costs of sales, because then you are talking about quite a risky strategy.
Let's try this, since research is in my blood. Clap in the audience if your company offers some aspect or type of free tour. So you're, all these years later, does he work for you?
No.
Both of them work for you?
No. Yeah, I think also it depends on what type of market you would like to capture, because something that is specific, not to SANDEMANs anymore, but something that is specific to the free tour concept is that it speaks to people who are not part of the tours and activities sector. We live in a bit of a bubble here, I think, and our assumption is that everybody takes tours and activities when they visit a city because they should. The free tour eliminates that risk, and it does kind of open up, it's a gateway drug, essentially, to tours and activities.
Share with the audience, just quickly, what's the history? How did this start? Maybe the evolution would be meaningful as they shape their businesses.
Yeah, so I mean, that actually, we go back 16 years, and that's when our owner and founder, Chris Sandeman, was delivering walking tours with a company who we actually still compete with here in Berlin. They're not here today, unfortunately, under a kind of typical paid tour model. And Chris found, I suppose partly because he's North American, I would say, and he has that kind of attitude to that you can work for tips, that you should go above and beyond, which we're catching up a little bit on here in Europe. And secondly, because he was a real convert to that style of guiding, which has become not exclusive, but synonymous with the free tour, which is infotainment, so about captivating audiences, bringing audiences to life, and those two things sort of dovetailed together to mean that in that case he was very often seeing a total sum of his tips earnings, which was greater than what he was being paid by the company. He pitched it to that organization, and it didn't go down well, which of course I can understand, because
and I was amazed. How many employees do you have?
We employ over 250 members of staff across 20 cities, and we work with 650 freelance guides.
And I think you said over 2 million customers.
Last year. Yeah.
Maybe that'll change some of the audience's mind. There's some countries you cannot operate in.
Yeah,
Italy,
that's right.
Austria, why is that?
I wouldn't say that it's that we cannot operate, but we choose not to operate because they are regulated markets. So we do operate in a couple of regulated markets, one of which being our two cities in Israel, and one being in New York as well, where there are restrictions on guide licensing. You have to have an official state license in order to perform tours. And we do work with a lot of official guides, licensed guides in our other markets as well.
But you don't do the free tours?
We do the free tour in the other markets, yeah, absolutely. And the official guides do operate free tour or run free tours with us. But it's the restriction that places on us just in terms of talent pool as far as guides are concerned mean that it's, for the moment anyway, uninteresting for us.
What about the regulations in New York and Israel enable you to make the decision of operating, but in Italy and Austria you choose not to? What's the difference?
Yeah, well, I think in Israel it was a decision by our owner and CEO at the time, Chris Sandeman. I think really not based on much else than he went to a close friend of his wedding and really fell in love with the place, and maybe didn't make the decision kind of based on the right kind of metrics. But absolutely no regrets, and Israel is going kind of fantastically well for us now. But it's a challenge, and I think the lessons from Israel are what have sort of put us off doing that again. In New York, excuse me, in New York, it's a completely different, thank you, it's a completely different barrier to entry in terms of what the test is. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So they also say there's no such thing as bad PR. Sometimes that's a tough pill to swallow. What can you tell us about recent examples, challenges you've had in Paris and Copenhagen?
Yeah, so we spoke about this kind of a couple of weeks ago, and it's, I would have to say they are isolated incidents, but ones that are perhaps, recurring more often. I would also say that they are incidents from individuals. We've always had these challenges to the business model, from licensed official guides, even in deregulated markets, have been quite commonplace for us over the years, and they can range, and they have ranged from the sort of hilarious and preposterous, for example, kind of licensed guides in Paris kind of running into places where we're operating and stealing our flyers and stuffing them in their handbags and scurrying away real quickly.
But that's not what happened in Paris.
That's not what happened in Paris. Very, very recently, it kind of graduated to something more serious, where one of our groups was stopped and accosted by an individual. And despite the fact that he was speaking into a camera, used incredibly offensive but also violently threatening language to the guide, because the guide was operating absolutely legally with this kind of perception that they were stealing their...
But they weren't part of that organization or whatever?
No. And I think that's something that's been very difficult for us too, and continues to be a challenge to communicate. That if you go on one of our walking tours, I challenge you to pick out anyone in that crowd that would be a potential customer for a licensed guide.
What happened?
It's a different market.
What happened to the customers during that?
Well, they stand back in disbelief, and this is the real sort of tragedy of it, that it's not a great representation of the city of X, where this might happen. And very often, and again, I'm only speaking about individuals and a few isolated cases, but very often these uber professional sort of licensed guides have left their own group, by the way, in order to hurl abuse and to some of the guides who we work with. Yeah.
Shifting gears, I've been in the travel distribution space for decades, and pride myself in keeping up with technology and distribution and companies, and I'm just amazed in this sector how many companies are in the tech distribution space, channel platforms, and it sounds like that if you're not on one of them, you're going to miss out. But there's so many small companies here. How can you help the audience? How do you navigate which of these distribution players that market themselves as the best and the most comprehensive? How do you sort through that?
It is absolutely a challenge, and I suppose up until now we've had the free tours being the kind of core to a certain extent of what we do is a bit of a barrier to entry as far as the OTAs are concerned. We're finally sort of convincing the OTAs that...
You mean that they're reluctant to include you?
Our free tours, at least, yeah. Our free tours, at least. And you can understand why. There's a complication in terms of the commission and how the financials, kind of work.
Is that why? Or is there some philosophical thing about a free tour?
I mean, not that they've shared with me. Not that there could be, actually.
It's probably.
Thank you for putting that idea into my head. That
30% of zero is 30%, so they're not going to make it.
Well, there are ways for us to kind of finance the free tour through OTAs, through hotel, hostel, reception desks, and what have you. Either paying it's a smaller commission that we would offer on our paid tours, but it's an easy sell, and we work with plenty of hotels, hostels, and OTAs indeed, who earn an awful lot more from engaging with free tours than they do with our paid tours. Yeah. So that's been a challenge, firstly, with the free tours. In terms of our paid tours, we have the same challenge as other operators, increasing kind of distribution channels, a growing, albeit a minority, but a growing minority, sort of coming from OTAs, and of course have the same debates about commission, especially with tours which are excursions and including costs of sales. And what we've done is sort of focus on 3 or 4 of the sort of bigger, more interesting OTAs up until now, to really kind of perfect our relationship with them and how effective we are on those platforms before I think to kind of open it up and expand with kind of smaller OTAs or sort of
What percentage of those 2 million customers last year booked directly somehow with SANDEMANs?
So book directly with SANDEMANs, that would be the absolute majority. That'd be over 80% book directly.
Over 80%.
Yeah.
Philip, we have a question from the audience here.
Hi, my name is Manuela. I'm the owner of a relatively small tour operator company in Bulgaria, and I'm a tour guide myself. We don't offer free tours, but I'm actually quite a fan of the concept. And because you touched upon the issue of the regulated markets, Bulgaria in particular is kind of a mixed bag. Yes, if you are to lead a tour, you need to have a professional license as a tour guide. We do, however, have a free city tour in Sofia. So I guess my question is, because a lot of the disruptive communication and kind of relationships between licensed guides and the guides leading the free Sofia tour comes from the fact that a lot of the non-professional guides that are basically volunteers, they tend to kind of give a lot of false information about Bulgarian history, about the monuments. So they kind of highlight on the interaction and the attraction part of the tour, but not so much on the accuracy of what they are giving to their customers, basically. And this has been really the main issue of this disruptive communication between the licensed guides and the tour guides. So how do you deal with ensuring quality of the actual accuracy of what your guides are presenting?
Well, firstly, I'm very sorry to hear, if indeed it is the case, I don't have any direct experience, but I'm very sorry to hear about that, because there's nothing worse than hearing that there are free or paid tour guides out there who are doing a bad job and giving a bad impression, of the industry and the subsector of walking tours. How we do it is we have a very, very difficult, we'll never sacrifice on quality. We have an average of 5 stars on TripAdvisor in all of our markets, and that's across 175,000 reviews. So we'll never sacrifice on quality. That's who we are and what our brand attests to. Guides have to pass a very, very difficult written test at the start of any cooperation with us. I actually tried the one in Berlin for old time's sake a few months ago and failed miserably because it's
your own tour.
Yeah, because it's not just about historic Berlin in that example. It's not just about the history of Berlin. It's about the socio-political landscape, which of course is ever-changing. It's about contemporary Berlin, cultural Berlin, etc., etc. So they pass that very difficult test, and then we want to see their tour as well. We want to video it, or they video it themselves rather. They submit that, and that's how we sort of check that every guide that we would ever assign our brand to would be of the relevant style and guiding kind of capacity.
Interesting.
I mean, quality is never, to be honest, in our case. To be honest, there are always going to be people, and again, I don't know the particular case that you're talking about, but there are always going to be people who, associate free with cheap and cheap with bad. But again, you can talk about quality because it's a subjective thing till the cows come home. Statistically, the customers love it.
Another question here.
Is it working? Hello, I'm Juan Castillo. I'm the CEO of CuruWalk. It's the biggest community of free walking tour guides. And I just wanted to say, if you want, I can share you some numbers of how much money free walking tour guides are making, because I see that most of the people are like afraid or see it as a threat. And as David said, it's a big opportunity. And always, if you take care of the quality, we have 1,800 guides in the world in 70 plus countries. And the good guys and the guides that have good quality, like SANDEMANs quality, they make in 30 people group like €8 per person. So if you do like 2 tours per day, you are earning a lot of money. If you have a small group of 10 people or something, you get like €10 per person. And the customer acquisition is very cheap. So
Are your tours as good as SANDEMANs?
Some of them, yes, some of them not.
Oh, okay.
We try to acquire like the best guides. Yeah, but we have some crazy numbers. Like there's one guy in Vienna who is working 15 hours per day. He's earning more than €7,000 per month. He doesn't have his own website. He doesn't have any marketing campaign. So it's a good opportunity for everyone.
Maybe instead of working your way up, you ought to do something new and work your way back down and become a tour guide again.
Well, my hourly earnings have steadily decreased over the years. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, but that's great, and it's great to hear that because the guides are the ones who sort of deserve it as well. They're the deliverers of the service ultimately.
I have a last question for you. Douglas or Bruce or Alex?
Oh my God.